So if you don't know, these certain YouTube videos that have been blowing up in these last few months. Basically, these white guys are going around to Chinese restaurants or Chinese places, and then kind of surprising or pranking people by speaking perfect Chinese. It's actually pretty incredible. Their vocabulary is better than my Chinese, and rightfully so. Some of these videos are getting millions of views within months. One of them got 35 million views within 5 months, which is almost unheard of. So this is incredible, and I just find it so heartwarming considering that I am Chinese, and so I'm studying these people, and my Chinese is rusted. Their vocabulary is like two or three times mine, and then on top of that, it's just so incredible that they've taken the time to appreciate this language and respect it. So this video is going to be twofold. One, I'm just going to be giving my thoughts and reaction to these videos, and then the second part is to discuss how viable and useful it is to learn Chinese in the modern world, as opposed to Spanish or French, which are usually the languages that they teach in school now, or they used to. Now they're definitely introducing Mandarin and sometimes replacing languages that they used to teach in school. So first off, this is incredible. It's not my first time experiencing this. For a lot of people on YouTube, it is. But, I've come across at least 3 or 4 people over my lifetime who are white and could speak incredibly good Chinese. Sometimes it's just in random places. Like one time we were taking some type of road trip, and it was literally we was in one of those rest stations where you go to pee, and one of the people there was white and struck up a conversation with my dad, and he spoke incredible Chinese, which was amazing. And my dad talked to me about it, and we were like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And then we continued driving. That was it. Other times it's been longer or more engaged. I went to a international language exchange meetup group once in Washington, D.C., and one of the guys there he was white, and he had glasses, and people just tend to naturally group into these like groups of 2 or 3 or 4 people, depending on the language. So there's like a French group, there's a Spanish group, and of course there was the Chinese group. And this guy was there, and he was speaking some incredible Chinese. Now this time it was more engaged because I got to talk to him for longer, but also because he had never actually been to China. What he did was he studied himself at the library, and then since there was a lot of Chinese people who frequented that library, he would get them to kind of train him, and of course they had a lot of fun doing so, and of course he learned a lot. His Chinese was really good, and usually when you compliment these people, they're also very humble. They're usually like, no, it's not that good. But this guy was incredible. His vocabulary was better than mine. Usually, the pronunciation is usually where you see some defects, because it's hard. I mean, it's a language based on tonality. So if you're just a little bit off with the tone or the inflections, people are going to notice that. And so it was a little bit off with that, but not bad. And even with this guy on YouTube, Xiaomanyc, and some of the others, his tone's a little bit off, but who cares? I mean, even if when you have such a large vocabulary, I mean, that's impressive to me. By far, like in certain ways, I care more about that than if you have a little bit of an American accent. And of course, I've come across others on the internet too. Of course, a few years ago, I did a video about Mark Zuckerberg doing a whole Q&A in Chinese, and that was really impressive. I really hope he's kept up with the language, because if you don't keep up with it, you lose it. Which is another thing. And his tone, his inflections was off, but his vocabulary, his ability to understand other was on point, which was incredible. And I just got so excited watching that I had to make a video just kind of praising him. And here I am again doing it all these years later. Now, that's a good transition into the viability and usefulness of Chinese in the modern world. I want to start off with a quote from Charlie Munger, who is the business partner to Warren Buffett. And he said this during a shareholder meeting a few years ago. So someone from the audience asked him, how useful is Chinese for business in the modern world? And he said incredibly, incredibly useful. But it depends on what you're doing, where you're traveling to, and where you use it, basically, your applicability. And he gave the example, well, if you're someone who does, international business, or you do some level of just business exchange between Oklahoma and Beijing, it's going to be incredibly valuable and useful and a huge skill set for your earning potential. But he said, if you're a dentist stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, and all your patients are local Nebraskans, your viability for Chinese is slim to none, because you never have to use it. You never need to use it or benefit from using it. So I found that very valuable. It's always been on my mind for the last 10 years or so that, China's been coming up. It's a superpower now. And now it's kind of, the hype has died down a bit, but it's still present and there. And I think it's incredibly useful and valuable. And so I've been kind of just keeping that in the back of my mind. And every now and then, I've been trying to sharpen up my Chinese for that reason. If you were to fast forward to me back 15 years ago, I didn't care. I didn't care about Chinese. I quit Chinese school. I just kind of didn't really care about doing it. It seemed like, whatever. But now, people are respecting China more or less. I mean, there's also the pandemic, which isn't making China look good, but that will pass, hopefully. And I want to give a story of myself on how useful Chinese is. So a couple years ago, I went on, I think it was 2.5 years ago, I flew to China, and it was a layover. That was it. It was just a layover to Shanghai, to go to another country. I think this was actually a year ago. And it wasn't even to spend time there. It was just a layover into China. And on my flight from the US to China, and on my flight layover from Shanghai and then back to New York, both times using Chinese really helped out, because other people needed it. So the time I was flying to China, the guy sitting on my left had a peanut allergy. And guess what? All the flight attendants, the pilot, could not speak English. It was like, are you kidding me? This is an international flight and you can't speak English? And I had to be the translator. This guy was having a little life-threatening peanut allergy next to me, because he brought some smoothie on board and he drank it and it had peanuts in it, and he didn't know that. And I think the flight was Air China, so I guess it makes sense that they didn't speak English. But I had to translate for them. And I was kind of like, it was an experience to remember because it made the trip exciting. But I'm like, God damn it, man. Anxiety and stress already. And I'm traveling. It was my first solo flight across the world. And right off the bat, I'm having a freaking life-threatening thing. Luckily, he didn't die. And luckily, it was a weird situation because he was like, don't worry, usually, it gets really like, his throat was like inflaming and stuff. And I was like, how bad is this? How bad do your allergies usually get? And he's like, usually, I've never had it that bad. Usually I stay away from peanuts, so I don't really know, which made me nervous because he wasn't sure how bad it was. But that was one instance. And eventually I was able to communicate enough so that the other passengers and the flight attendant knew what was going on, which actually didn't, the flight attendants made it worse because they freaked out. They just got very nervous. And then the passengers started asking each other for allergy medicine. And then it was a whole story for another day. They called on doctors on board, and the plane didn't have any allergy medicine or shots or anything, which blew my mind as well. Like, you would expect an international flight that takes 18 hours to have some like medicine on board. Like, has no one anticipated the fact that someone can die from a peanut allergy on board? But that's one story and ridiculous. Geez. And then on my flight back, I had other experiences where people needed my help translating. So this just goes to show you. So on my flight back, I connected in Shanghai, and then because I had like a few hours before my Shanghai flight took off back to New York, I just went into one of those airport food courts, which kind of suck, but it is what it is. And I ate some Chinese food there, which was pretty cool. I think it was just rice and a black bean bun and some other, snacks. And I was eating that there, and inevitably, something else erupts right next to me, and I can't help it because like they're having a huge problem because they can't communicate, and I had to just jump in and help them because surprise, surprise, like a lot of people speak Chinese but not English, and a lot of people speak English, but not Chinese, or they speak really good Chinese and really crappy English. You would think more people would speak both, but I think from what I've heard, like Chinese people will learn English in school, and kind of like Spanish for us, we'll just forget it after school. So this white guy, kept pointing this teapot at the food order people, and he was trying to say like, where can I buy this? Where can I buy this? And the Chinese people who were serving food at the restaurant had no idea what he was doing because they sold food and they just saw him pointing at a teapot, which they did have. They had that teapot and they're using it to like make tea to sell, but they had no idea what the heck he was doing. He was pointing at the teapot. They could have thought he was crazy, or he wanted to throw hot water or tea at the person, or he wanted organic tea only and he was pissed off. They didn't know. So I watched it go on and I was like, man, no one else is helping out. I think I would be the only one here to help. The restaurant was packed, but it seemed like everyone there only spoke Chinese. So I jumped in and I used my crappy Chinese, which wasn't that good, to translate. And I just barely managed to get it through. At first, they were kind of confused. And then they understood what I was trying to communicate. And they're like, oh. And then they pointed to the well, first they were like, we don't sell teapots here. And then I'm like, I know, but he's trying to figure out where you can buy this because you have that teapot. And then they understood and they were like, oh, they were literally, that's the sound they made. And they're like, oh, and then they pointed to the store next door, which, I mean, this guy could have used his common sense and looked at the store next door, which probably sold appliances and teapots and household items, and figured it out himself. But that's beside the point. I helped out. He got very happy. He was like, thank you. And then he went to next door to buy the teapot. So, just goes to show you, like, here I am, not even trying, and just through my connections through China, I had to help these people. So I think Chinese is very valuable, and obviously, it's very beneficial, but at the same time, it's one of those things where I'm surprised. I think there's more and more bilingual people in Chinese and English, but I'm still surprised that there's still a lot of people, a ton of them. I was going to curse there, but I'm not. A ton of them that they only speak Chinese or they only speak English. And of course, there's going to be some value there. For me, currently, I don't do any international business, so it really isn't that viable. I had one instance where I was asked to translate Chinese that was written because a business I worked with had a Chinese component, or they were trying to sell to Chinese people. But even then, like, I was more of a connector than anything. I basically connected them with someone because I can't read and write and translate, which is a whole nother beast. At the end of the day, it's just fun. I mean, this is why this guy gets so many views. I mean, it's just fun, like surprising them, and they have a right to be impressed. It is a hard language. Um, and I'm trying to learn Spanish too. I've taken many years of Spanish, but I'm trying to get good at Spanish as well. And I'm curious if they would have this. It would have the same effect when if I were to go in and speak Spanish, but probably not as much because Chinese is like in the top level of hardest languages to learn. So there you have it. Really fun stuff.